I gave this exhortation at the Wolves. It was more or less a family ecclesia, and there was a lot of young people there. So the Bible uses animals extensively as objects of lessons for us throughout the Scriptures. In Isaiah 1 we read, "The ox knoweth his owner, and the ass his master's crib. But Israel doth not know, my people doth not consider." In the Old Testament we read of the distinction that was placed between the clean and the unclean animals. And we think of that as part of the law of Moses. But it was a lot older than the law of Moses. We know that Noah was commanded to bring the clean and the unclean animals into the ark by different numbers in Genesis. And so the distinction between the clean and the unclean animals, using the animals as lessons for the people of the time, goes right back to before the flood. And in Deuteronomy, Moses reinforced this law on Israel before he died. There's a lot of important lessons to be learned from animals. Certain characteristics that we should or should not follow in our own lives. And Peter was shown the lesson of the clean versus unclean when he was shown all manner of unclean beasts and told, "Arise, slay and eat." God showed him that men and women answering to the animals listed as unclean were capable of being redeemed by Christ, even though they were considered unclean. The law which made the distinction between unclean and clean animals had been removed by the blood of Christ. But the lesson that was meant to be taught was not removed. And it was something that can never be forgotten by us. It was there like before the law. It's there to teach us a lesson. It demands holiness on the part of God's people. And that was reinforced by the law. That was what the law was intended to express. And that demand between righteousness and unrighteousness, holiness and unholiness, clean and unclean, still is a very active part of our lives, even though the law is done away. We must be able to discern good and bad, right and wrong, holy and profane, clean, unclean. In Leviticus 20:25, it says, "Ye shall put therefore a difference between clean beast and unclean, and between unclean fowl and clean. And ye shall not make your souls abominable by beast, or by fowl, or by any manner of living thing that creepeth on the ground, which I have separated from you as unclean. And ye shall be holy unto me, for I, the Lord, am holy. And I have severed you from other people, that ye should be mine." And so Peter in the New Testament picks up that lesson for us, and he says in 1 Peter 1:15, "But as he which hath called you is holy, so be ye holy in all manner of conversation." And that word conversation should better be translated lifestyle, in all activities. Because it is written, "Be ye holy, for I am holy." And so this is a fundamental principle right since the beginning of time. It's fundamental to the truth that we understand that it's absolutely necessary for our spiritual welfare and for the welfare of the ecclesia that its members should be unerring in making that distinction between holy and unholy, clean and unclean. Nadab and Abihu learned this lesson the hard way. They were killed, and God said in Leviticus 10:8, And the Lord spake unto Aaron, saying, Do not drink wine or strong drink, thou nor thy sons with thee, when thou goest into the tabernacle of the congregation, lest ye die. It shall be a statute forever throughout your generations, and that ye may put difference between holy and unholy, between unclean and clean. Anything that will blunt our ability to make this discernment, the alcohol, the drugs, whatever it is that causes us to be unable to make that distinction, must be avoided. In spite of these divine instructions, even to their existence to the end of the kingdom, Israel made the same mistake as Nadab and Abihu. They failed to make the distinction. And this fact constitutes a grim warning to us to make the difference between the clean and the unclean, the holy and the unholy, and not be careless like Nadab and Abihu. Now, the animals were divided into 3 classes. You had the sea animals, the land animals, and the fowls of the air. And I want to zero in on land animals today, and specifically on one land animal. It's an animal that we saw a lot of when we were in Egypt and in Israel, and that is the camel. Land animals were classified by their physical attributes, by which a clean animal could be identified. And if we were to ask most people, they would say that the 2 things about the land animals that made them clean was that it should be cloven-footed, which represents sure-footedness in the things of God, so we don't slip. And number 2, that it chewed the cud, that it would chew on the word and bring it up and chew on it again and keep going over and over, making it a part of ourselves, even as the animal did the food it ate. However, if we only used these 2 attributes, we would fail to make proper distinction. For the camel is cloven-footed, and it chews the cud, yet it is unclean. The law is very specific. And the Lord spake unto Moses and to Aaron, saying unto them, Speak unto the children of Israel, saying, These are the beasts which ye shall eat among all the beasts that are on the earth. Whatsoever parteth the hoof, and is cloven-footed, and cheweth the cud, among beasts, that ye shall eat. So we see there are 3 distinctions that were made, not 2. It said it had to part the hoof, be cloven-footed, and chew the cud. The next verse says, Nevertheless, which in the Hebrew signifies for example. And then the record goes on to use 3 examples to emphasize the need for spiritual discernment in the clean and the unclean. It says, Nevertheless, these shall ye not eat of them that chew the cud, or them that divide the hoof. The outward appearance may be deceptive. So he specifies. He says, As the camel, because it cheweth the cud, but it divideth not the hoof, he is unclean unto you. It chewed the cud, and it is cloven-footed, but it doesn't divide the hoof. Now, the camel is known as the ship of the desert. It can be loaded with 500 pounds of good and carry that load through the hottest and most inhospitable waste of the desert. Camels are better suited for the desert than the modern jeeps, and it can travel where jeeps cannot go. A camel costs about 1/10 as much to keep up and is more reliable than a jeep in the hot, sandy deserts. After about 4 years in the desert, a jeep's not much good, but a camel is still going after 20 years of service. The Creator designed the camel for desert travel. Its big feet are unique, which keeps the camel from sinking into the sand. Its eyes have 3 eyelids each, and long, thick eyelashes on the 2 outer lids to keep the sand out of its eyes. The thin inner lids work like windshield wipers to clean the dust off the eyeball. And the camel's ears are covered inside and out with hair to keep the ears free of any sand that would be blowing around. In a bad sandstorm, the camel can close its nostrils and breathe through its mouth, which is covered with big, floppy lips, once again, to trap the sand. A few days after Desert Storm started in Iraq, we had to hunker down because of 3 days sandstorm. The United States moved in, and a sandstorm came up, and they just hunkered down. The helicopters, the planes, the jeeps, the tanks, they were all useless in the sandstorm. They just had to sit there and wait it out. But not so with the camel. It was designed for the desert and is prepared for anything that the desert will give it. The camel has a unique built-in body temperature control which keeps it cool in the hot daytime desert, and it keeps it warm in the cool desert nights. It can therefore withstand the temperature changes of the desert without any problem. With nothing to eat, the camel can live for days on the fat that's stored in its hump. And it can go up to a week without any water in the hottest part of the desert. In the winter, it can survive for months without water, as long as it gets some vegetation. It is able to eat plants that other animals wouldn't eat. Ones with large, rugged thorns are simply taken into its mouth and ground up for food. Camels were the usual riding animals of the Old Testament because they were stronger than horses. We remember Rachel was on a camel, and she hid Laban's idols in the furniture of the camel. Abraham sent his servant on a trip to Syria with 10 camels. We could use many other examples where camels were the common animal of transportation and work in the Old Testament. One way that was used to estimate a person's worth was the number of camels they owned. We're told that Abraham had sheep and oxen and camels in abundance. We're told the same thing about Isaac. We're given an example of just how rich Job was. We're told that he had 3,000 camels. In 1 Chronicles, it's recorded that 50,000 camels were taken in battle as part of the booty. Camels were used as cavalry in war. And in Judges 7, verse 12, to give us an idea of how formidable Israel's enemy was, we're told, "And the Midianites and the Amalekites and all the children of the east lay in the valley like grasshoppers for multitude, and their camels were without number, as the sand by the seaside for multitudes." It was indeed a formidable host that Gideon was to go up against with 300 unarmed men. Camels were very valuable animals. Even their hair was used for clothing. We remember John the Baptist. He wore a raiment of camel's hair as he went and preached in the desert. The camel is a ruminative animal. Its exaggerated movements of its large jaw make it apparent to all that it's an animal that chews the cud. Its very large mouth, and there can be no question that the camel answers the necessary characteristics. And the camel is also cloven-footed, but it doesn't divide the hoof into two claws. And this is the distinction. The hoof must have a complete division so that each section can operate independently of the other. An animal with a truly cloven, divided hoof is one with the ability to walk surely even on terrain which is uneven or up steep ascents. The gazelle and the mountain goats are examples of this wonderful ability. These animals can make their way surely among the jagged rocks and up the steep cliffs of the mountain terrains. These creatures are clean, and they have the ability to maintain their balance and their surety in difficult terrain. And so this is taken by the scriptures and used as a symbol of the need for sure-footedness in the walk in the truth when circumstances and times become difficult. The camel's divided hoof has a pad on the underside of it, which joins it together and makes it remarkable for walking in sandy places. The pad spreads out and stops him from sinking deeply into the sand. It, however, is not useful on hilly country in Judea. On slippery or wet soil and on rocks, the camel is a hopeless flounderer. So it's designed for a specific type of terrain, and that's all it's good for. The camel was unclean because he typifies one who may masticate on the word and even have the ability in certain spheres of activity to show himself very adept. But when you get him in other circumstances, which calls for surety and confidence, he becomes untrustworthy and unreliable. Those who wish to follow God faithfully cannot be like the camel in this respect. We must deal with all trials. We must be sure-footed no matter what the conditions we're put under. The camel was to be considered as unclean. And another reason the camel would not be considered clean was because it's a very deceiving animal. By all outward appearance, one would think the camel would be considered clean and one that would be associated with things that we should emulate. It has such a large mouth and it sits there chewing the cud. It obviously meets the requirement of being clean. It also has a very large cloven hoofs. It clearly meets that requirement for being clean. But the camel is one of three animals that's singled out to Israel as one that they must take a closer look at. And upon closer inspection, if one looked on the underside of the hoof, the fact is exposed that the hoof is not really divided. Israel was to be very careful in ensuring that they could put a difference between the clean and the unclean. We can re-ask one of Paul's questions. Is God that concerned about the camel, or does he say it for our sakes? For our sakes, no doubt, this is written. The example is for us to examine ourselves, for us to gain wisdom and understanding and put the difference between the clean and the unclean, to be sure-footed in all circumstances. Jeremiah compares the walk of the camel to that of Israel. In Jeremiah 2:23, it says, "How canst thou say, I am not polluted, I have not gone after Balaam? See thy way in the valley, know what thou hast done. Thou art a swift dromedary, transversing his ways. It is a dim-witted beast, and it has the habit of aimlessly wandering around and crossing its own tracks in the desert sand." Israel was to make straight paths for its feet, and so are we. To emulate the camel in its walk will bring us ruin spiritually. The camel is described as a stupid animal. It's ill-tempered and extremely vindictive. It's not uncommon for a camel to inflict a severe wound upon a person who he dislikes. He will long remember any unkindness or cruelty inflicted upon him, and he does his utmost to render evil for evil. Even amongst themselves, the camels fight dreadfully. Lacking horns, they use their teeth to grab a leg and pull and tug until they cause their opponent to fall, and then they drop upon him with their knees and pound him to death. They have no understanding of mercy or forgiveness or when enough is enough. They appear to have the same cloven hoof as the lamb, but their walk is far different from that example. Paul warns of walking as does the camel in Galatians 5:15. It says, "But if ye bite and devour one another, take heed that ye be not consumed of one of another. This I say then, walk in the Spirit, and ye shall not fulfill the lust of the flesh." And in 1 Corinthians 14 he says, "Brethren, be not children in understanding. Howbeit in malice be ye children, but in understanding be men." We are not left in any doubt as to the moral implications involved in the distinctions between the clean and the unclean animals. The difficulty is in overcoming our unclean flesh and exemplifying those characters that are pleasing to God as exhibited in the clean animals. Following the example of our Master that he has left us, and not following the deceptive camel who appears outwardly to be clean, but on close inspection shows a far different character. And so we're commanded, let a man examine himself, and so let him eat of this bread and drink of this cup.